Start your day at Ease Old Town Coffee and Eatery in Fort Gibson. Enjoy rich coffee, lattes, homemade biscuits and gravy, hearty breakfasts, and fresh lunches, all served with a small town charm. Find Ease on Main Street in downtown Fort Gibson, open Monday through Saturday, 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. Ease Old Town Coffee and Eatery. Good food, good coffee, and good company. Hello, welcome to Hawk Talk T&E's podcast. My name is Cobe Cook, and I'm sitting down today with Blain McClain, NSU's Archivist, who are here today to discuss the springs underneath NSU campus. Thank you guys for taking the time to talk to me today, and let's talk more about the springs underneath NSU.
Yeah, so I'm NSU's Archivist and Special Collections Coordinator. And, Kobe had asked me about the springs, I think, last semester, and kind of what was up with that, and some questions about how the springs are related to the campus and how they actively affect the campus today.
So, I was very interested in the springs probably around last year, and I was trying to find some information about it, and the one person I can find that knew anything really about it was Blain, and he kind of went into a lot of details, especially the financial side and kind of like the long history of where it kind of comes from, and he knew kind of the base knowledge, and I'm pretty sure he has more to tell us now. So, kind of the first questions, how many springs are confirmed to be under the university, and where exactly are they located and expected to be?
Yeah, so I went and spoke to a member of facilities, and right now they have what they consider to be 2 active springs. So one of those is under the Business and Technology building, and then the other is under our East Wing in the John Vaughn Library. They both have pumps on them. Now, from what he said, there's a lot of groundwater, but spring is relative to basically how much water comes out of them. And so those 2 are the only 2 springs, quote unquote, but they have pumps in literally every elevator shaft around campus. And we recently had kind of heard some stories about when there was a bit of a leak from one of the elevators, it made it into the creek at one point. So a lot of the campus is definitely connected to groundwater. But likely, I would say there's 2 properly under the buildings. And the rest are kind of just based on how much water is floating around, how much, with the rain we've had lately, there are probably more. But those are the 2 springs, quote unquote. And a lot of the groundwater that has been a problem over the years is now taken care of by, like, permanent drainage. The campus has quite a bit of drainage underneath it. Tahlequah in general does. So
now, usually, which building is likes to flood the most? Because I knew there's usually certain types of buildings.
So most of the buildings that have flooded in my time have been from outside rain caused by the hills. So the ones like journalism and some of those smaller admin buildings that have basements, those areas have caught flowing water. I don't know if there's ever been a proper flood from the springs. Now, how I found out about the spring under ours, I worked there for over a decade before I knew it was there. It's under the auditorium in the East Wing, and one day I happened to be walking out to go to lunch, and there were a bunch of pipes and hoses running into there from outside. And I looked in, and there was a maintenance crew member laying on the floor looking down this vent on the stage, and I kind of walked down there and was like, "Hey," he goes, "Oh, hey, your pump went out." I was like, "What pump?" He's like, "Oh, the spring underneath here." And I looked down there, and there's about a 10-foot drop to this big concrete vault. I mean, I would guess it's probably 1,000 gallons or more. And they had a sump pump in there, and it failed. And the reason they knew it failed was a professor giving a final called and said, "Hey, there's water squirting out of the vent on this stage." And so, I mean, it had to be thousands of gallons to do that. But that was our first indicator that there was continually flowing groundwater to there. And that, kind of surprised me, having been in there for so long. I knew occasionally you get moisture, but, that's a lot of water.
That's exactly, yeah.
So when they dug down, I'm sure they had a fit trying to figure out how to deal with that.
So I guess that kind of goes into how you kind of first learned about the springs and all that.
Yeah, and I think, you can go further than that. So as archivists, deal with a lot of history of the university. And I think even broader than the university, Tahlequah in general ties a lot of its history to spring water.
Yes. Yeah.
So, there is evidence of historical Native American settlements, the mounds like we hear about Spiro and stuff. A lot of those kind of things are found near water. One that I know was excavated, I think in the 30s or 40s, is over where they call the Boy Scout Hole, which is a branch between the Bear and Fork Creek. And so, like, water's always been important. Then you get into the Cherokee removal. Post-Trail of Tears, part of the reason Cherokee Nation ended up where they ended up, they were assigned a large territory, but they stopped here because north of Tahlequah is a ton of freshwater springs. Very specifically, there's one called Double Springs that is where basically the initial government was reorganized post-Trail of Tears. And that spot was picked because water was hard to find. I mean, good clean water back then was, life. Yeah. And so for Tahlequah, I think the springs are important. And then even more specifically, why NSU is where it is actually directly related to the springs. So in 1887, when the first female seminary at Park Hill burned on Easter Sunday, the plan to rebuild it came up almost immediately. Like, there was no debate on whether they were going to rebuild the facility or not. They were. But almost immediately also they said, we're going to move it. And the reason they chose just north of Tahlequah was twofold. One, proximity to Tahlequah was a good thing. It allowed services and access and, gave more opportunity for people for the school to interact with the town. Back then, 3-4 miles it's not what it is now with a car and good roads. It took time, especially in the 1880s. So being close to Tahlequah was a benefit, but another was their water source out there was dependent on creeks. Creeks in Oklahoma dry out.
Exactly. So
there was a spring called Hendrick Spring that they said, hey, we want to build near that as our permanent fresh water source. And Hendrick Spring is roughly where Beta Pond is now, from what I gathered. There's an old building there, rock building, that's probably the spring house.
That's cool.
And so NSU's history is directly related to spring water and fresh water because that's why they chose this spot almost, word for word, because, hey, there's a good spring there, and I think this would be good. Tahlequah actually, organized to help get the land to them because they're like, that's a good spot for it. And so I think it's hard to separate that out. It's a funny thing to think like this little spring's the reason a big campus lives, state university, but there's probably more of them than you think are like that.
Exactly. That's because most people don't even know about the springs. Because I was telling them I'm coming today and we're talking about the springs. Like, there's springs underneath campus? I was like, actually, yes, there is. That's exactly why we're having this conversation.
Yeah, and I think, like, if people really thought about it, we have a huge, like, watershed here. The Illinois River, the Town Branch Creek all feed together. We have a lot in our watershed. And I know in living here, I know some about it, but we're sitting on a pretty big aquifer, the Boone Aquifer, and then there's another that we somewhat overlap with. So, I mean, groundwater in Oklahoma is pretty ubiquitous. It's shallow here compared to, like, out west. There's I think it's Ugala, is a big aquifer out west that the Panhandle has, but it's super, super deep. So you have to drill for it.
Exactly.
Whereas here, when it rains hard, spring water pops up all over.
That's kind of where the rain all kind of settles too a little bit.
Yeah. If it because of the hills, you can't saturate, and so stuff flows into creeks. But also a lot of it seeps. I mean, personally, my house is a well house. I mean, I have a well house. I run on well water. But I'm about the only person left who has one that functions where I live. So it's probably because whoever did it drilled deeper than just the shallow aquifer.
Exactly.
I don't live super far from the river, so it's pretty consistent. But with wells, you got to talk about the pressure level since nobody here is really using it. But we did some research looking into the seminary and the springs to try to figure out, if we could find any hard data on how much water they were getting. And you really can't because, I mean, that kind of quantification is more of a modern engineering thing, but they built the facility with indoor plumbing, like proper modern indoor plumbing. So they had to generate some water pressure.
Exactly.
As far as I can tell, there wasn't a water tower, so they were probably using some sort of mechanical pump system to get the water. But the spring probably had its own pressure. But we did find a pretty funny turn on that. So they opened with the indoor plumbing. Well, when they built the drainage for the septic system.
Yeah.
They dug a pit about 300 yards away from the school as a cistern, which is basically what modern septic systems are now. Laid pipe work and drained it. But they didn't account for how much groundwater there was. The system eventually filled with water and backed up and ended up polluting the spring slightly.
Dang.
And they had a typhoid outbreak that caused some student deaths. So there's several media sources from newspapers in the area and stuff where people evaluated and said that, hey, this system, the sewage system, is a real problem. So
Exactly.
they ended up capping it and not using it so they wouldn't contaminate the groundwater anymore. But I thought, well, you want to talk about like the dark side to
dark side of the
to the
springs.
history, have some deaths related to typhoid, and again, that was everybody's problem back then. But that's an indicator of how shallow the groundwater is too. That your septic system can leach
right into
it.
Clean water.
I mean, that sounds close, but like compared to modern septic, that's not that far. I mean, that's pretty close. That'd be pretty far by today's standards, and modern septic is designed not to let that happen. So it was interesting digging in though, because it's just like,
that's kind of not, because it's kind of like you don't ever kind of hear something like that, especially whenever it's kind of like that certain situation with the septic system and people getting sick like that. So
yeah, well, and you just think like if it had modern plumbing, like how could that
Exactly.
be an issue? But it was basically because the groundwater was so shallow it flowed back into the open area, and so it shows probably how easy it was to get the water out, but how easy it was to contaminate it also. And I mean, it's a big part of NSU's history. So
yeah. So how have the springs historically impacted NSU's development, or like Tahlequah's like a general and whole? Like, has it?
Well, I mean, Tahlequah's probably the same as anything else. Like, the reason Cherokee Nation stopped here was the water. And I know over the years they've had a lot of problems with infrastructure.
Yes.
Down by the Bill Willis parking lot towards the south end of campus past the Be the Change sign. That area 10 years ago was completely dug out, and they put in huge drainage because Tahlequah has historically flooded quite a bit. Now, that's generally from the rain, heavy rain in the hills, but also because the ground is already highly saturated. So anytime it rains, the water just flows. It doesn't soak in. And that's because the water table is shallow. I think the best answer is no one would probably be here if there wasn't that water.
Exactly.
And so everything that's become an infrastructure problem from it is still kind of
It's still the problem.
yeah, I mean, it's the same. The gift is the problem. The water's
Yes.
easy to get, but it's hard to deal with at times. So, I think you're not going to have Tahlequah, you're not going to have NSU, you're not going to have a lot of things without that spring water, but it's also been an infrastructure issue over the years.
It's the gift, but also the curse at the same time a little bit. Yeah,
Absolutely. And, I think to some level, like, they're not as important as they used to be. We don't use them for water system anymore. But, like I said, I have a well. And I think in general, keeping your water system as clean as possible is just a good stewardship of your area.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think people do take it seriously. We worked on a project related to the Cherokee Freedman High School, which is very close to some of those springs. And it's been private property for a long time, but it was at one point allotted land. And that spring system is still to this day pumping water.
Yeah.
It was so large of a spring at one point that someone was growing fish, using it as a fish farm.
Really?
Yeah, and so it's real cold and real clean, and I know it's been over the years. It's kind of a fight at times to keep sewage from being dumped, industrialization happening near it, because it's such a clean, nice water source. But that water, that water's the reason the tribe stopped where they stopped.
Exactly.
And it's the reason they put the school there, and so it definitely affects the history of the town.
That's so interesting though, especially.
Yeah, I mean, it's just not. People think there's probably more of like a definitive. We chose to stop here.
Exactly.
And it's like, yeah, probably to a level, but they probably chose to stop because hey, there's good water.
There's always a reason, kind of why.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people need their needs met, and water is one of the hardest to find and most necessary.
Exactly. Is there any notable like stories, legends, archive documents connected to the springs?
Well, so we have some photos that show kind of the undeveloped area before the rocks were put in. That was a project that was done later, I think in the 30s or 40s, where they rocked in the Beta Pond area, which I think is funny they call it a pond because it's essentially a creek, but it's
Yeah.
but it backs up right there and has a little side part. I always kind of wondered if at one point it was more of a pond in usage, and then over years the drainage has
Just
slowly
kinda
like made it wider and
dissipate,
wider.
yeah.
But it before they rocked it in, it was a much lower flow.
Mm.
But it looked more like a natural creek, and you can see some pictures where like the wagons are going through the low point. It's roughly where the town branch road area is.
Yeah.
They've raised up obviously 10, 15 feet, but like back then they went down. And so it's, that water's been flowing the whole time to some level. It just didn't drain all of Tahlequah's water into it at that point. But yeah, we've heard a few, obviously there's colloquials about people with the water, but probably the most interesting one that I've been told, and I cannot substantiate it, we looked, but during, I think the early 90s, there was a push to open a sewage waste plant north of town, and so there was a big fight about how the water would be protected, how could you ensure that it wouldn't get contaminated. And I think both for historical reasons, but also because people were pumping water out of it. There's a water district just north of town that still utilizes those springs. Near that historic spring that they call Seminary Springs, where the Freedman School was, there's a pump house for that rural water district, for the Grandview, I think it's Grandview Rural Water District. So they're still utilizing it. But I think at the time, they were trying to figure out how to expand Tahlequah's sewage waste and were worried about it, so they were testing the water a lot. And I found some water tests from the early 90s when they were making sure things were going on.
Yeah.
Anyway, the rumor, what I was told, and the man who told me was extremely adamant that this is what the thing said, they can basically fingerprint water.
Really?
So they'll go and they'll chemically break it down, and they can see what mineral content and what thing. I've heard this with like minerals and diamonds and things. You can tell where they're from by like what the slight differences are.
It's kind of like carbon dating.
I think I think it's so like, let's just say there's like a mineral content of like so much magnesium, a certain amount of like, certain distillates. When you see like glacial water, it's always grayish blue because it's got all the silt in it. And they fingerprint water from around different aquifers around the country or around the world probably. But in this case, he said that the water matched water that they had pulled from southern Canada, which seems just insane to me that water can make it that far. But that Ugala or whatever they call it, the large one, it runs from, I think, South Dakota down into Texas. So the aquifers can be pretty big. Yeah. But he was adamant that he's like, it shocked the people who did the testing that they're like, well, this is only matching one other water source and it's a so-and-so. And I thought, boy, if that's true, though, it shows how damaging it really could be, though, to let like chemicals in Nebraska get into your water supply because they could affect a table this far south.
Or across the world.
Yeah, I mean, when he told me, I was kind of like, really? And he's like, oh, yeah. He's like, it freaked everybody out that water is matching. I was like, maybe it's a certain happenstance. I'm not a water expert. But I thought, if that's true, that's a crazy, crazy look at how widespread it, some chemical dump could be.
Kind of an outbreak will be.
Yeah, you just, somebody spilled a bunch of pesticides in South Dakota. I wouldn't normally care that much other than in general terms. But if it could affect my groundwater here, then it gets a lot more personal.
Exactly, yeah.
Illinois River has had that over the years where nitrates from chicken farms get in the system and cause, algae growth and things. And that's why there's groups like STIR, Save the Illinois River, and they do a lot of work to try to keep that kind of thing from happening through legislative and like hands-on work. I don't think there's anybody who does that for our spring water currently. I kind of poked around just to see if like TPWA or anybody, Tahlequah Public Works, did any sort of maintenance or anything. I didn't find anything. Yeah. I think at this point they're more of a historical novelty and probably to maintenance somewhat of a pest at times, having to deal with all the pumps, but
kind of just deal with things every once in a while.
But they make the area what it is, so I think it's, neat to know that.
So have there been any efforts to, I guess you kind of did, they've kind of been preserving the springs underneath campus and stuff. Kind of.
Yeah, I don't think there's any stopping them, but there's not like a real concerted effort to like see them utilized either. I think at this point it's just sort of let them be and try to keep the buildings as safe as we can.
Keep it as safe, keep the water as clean as we can. Pretty much. So why do you think the story of the springs still matter today? I mean, it's pretty much why NSU is here.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Is like, they probably matter more as a historical marker, a historical like point than anything. than they do as a usable item today. But anytime you have something that is a like reason for something else happening, I think it's important to remember it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because like to those people, finding those springs was probably, many a prayer and many a wish from them, finding water that was clear and safe and reliable. And it was enough that when a building burned down and all that chaos and all that thought, they were like, hey, let's go ahead and find better water.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it should tell you how important it was. And if it was important to them, it should be important to us in the same way. That, like, remember there's a reason that things end up they are. And, and to the same facts, like, it's just good in general to take care of what resources you have.
Blain, it was great talking with you, and thank you for coming in. Thanks for listening to the Hawk Talk podcast. You can find us at nsunews.com, Spotify, or follow our social media pages at TNE News on Instagram and Twitter, and at the Northeastern on Facebook for the latest news. Thank you.
The Northeastern Student Government Association is a student-led organization committed to the betterment of the student body since 1925. NSGA programs and events are designed to enhance student life and handle student concerns. Whether it's student organization allocations, academic regalia loans, parking ticket forgiveness, or food assistance, NSGA wants to ensure NSU students are set up for success. NSGA events are free for all students to attend and include chances to speak with NSU faculty, staff, and NSGA members, as well as chances to participate in games and giveaways. Learn more about their events and programs by following their Instagram at NSU NSGA or their Facebook page at NSGA Northeastern Student Government Association.